They say money changes people, but sometimes it just tears off masks, revealing the true nature of those we thought we knew our whole lives. I realized this the moment my lottery ticket, with five matching numbers, transformed from a useless piece of paper into a check for $680,000. And while I was celebrating this unexpected stroke of luck, my wife was already scheming how to take that money and disappear with her lover. Only she didn't account for one thing. She never really got to know me during all our years of marriage. Her joyride with our money could end in tragedy and a heavy price to pay when you're lying at the bottom of a ravine, begging the person you betrayed to save your life. But let me tell you my story from the beginning. Ring in Portland isn't an event, it's a way of life, especially in November when the gray sky hangs so low it seems about to touch the rooftops. On days like these, the city dissolves into a watery haze, transforming into a blurred watercolor of muted colors and indistinct silhouettes. I stood at the window of our townhouse, absently watching droplets gather on the glass into winding trails. The latest heating bill lay on the table, mocking my attempts to make ends meet. To hell with it, I muttered, pulling on my worn jacket. I needed to buy bread and milk. Those simple things that keep us grounded in reality, reminding us that life goes on despite overdue payments and mounting debts. The old Ford started on the third try. Streams of water ran down the windshield, blurring the view of the empty street. I mechanically steered onto the road, heading toward the nearest mini-mart on Oak Street. The radio mumbled something about new city projects and rising prices, the usual background noise that had long ceased to carry any meaning. The mini-mart greeted me with flickering fluorescent lights and a sleepy nod from the elderly Chinese man behind the counter. Mr. Chen, according to his worn name tag, didn't even look up from his crossword puzzle when I passed by. The air hung heavy with the stale smell of cheap coffee and cleaning supplies. Passing the lottery stand, I suddenly stopped. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was a particularly bright reflection from the lamp on the glass display case, or just a momentary lapse in judgment. One ticket. The words came out on their own. Mega Millions. Mr. Chen tore himself away from the crossword with the air of someone interrupted while solving world problems. Which numbers? Doesn't matter. I placed a crumpled $5 bill on the counter. Any will do. The printer quietly hummed, spitting out a thin strip of paper. I stuffed the ticket in my jacket pocket, already cursing myself for this foolish waste of money. Bread, milk, and change. That was all I had to show for my trip to the store. Back home, the ticket ended up on the Ford's dashboard, lost among receipts and old parking stubs. It collected dust for 3 days until one evening, while going through my pockets, I came across it again. Ashley sat in the living room, buried in her phone. Lately, this had become her habitual pose. Shoulders slightly hunched, blonde hair falling across her face, fingers rapidly sliding across the screen. 6 years of marriage had taught me not to ask who she was texting. Might as well check the numbers, I said to myself, settling at the kitchen table with a bottle of beer. I opened the lottery website on my phone, unfolded the crumpled ticket. The first number matched. Nothing special. That happens. The second one, too. Funny coincidence. The third, the fourth. The beer grew warm, untouched. I checked the numbers 10 times, not believing my eyes. $680,000 after taxes. A life-changing sum, not enough to make us rich, but enough to pull us out of the debt hole, to give us a breath of fresh air. Ashley, I called out, and my own voice sounded foreign to me. Come here for a minute. What? She appeared in the kitchen doorway, still not looking up from her phone. At 34, she looked stunning, slim figure, chiseled features, flawless makeup. Only her eyes. Her eyes had long since looked past me. We won. I lifted the ticket, feeling like a character in a cheap comedy. The lottery. What? She finally looked up, and something like interest flickered in her blue eyes. How much? 250,000 after taxes. The phone disappeared into the pocket of her designer jeans so quickly, I barely caught the movement. She crossed the distance between us in 3 quick steps, and suddenly I felt her hands on my shoulders, the scent of expensive perfume enveloping me. Oh my God, Nathan. Her voice trembled with excitement. Are you serious? Show me. I handed her the ticket, watching her eyes dart across the numbers. Something in her reaction bothered me, like a false note in a familiar melody. Too quick, too perfect, as if she was playing the role of a happy wife, but slightly overacting. This changes everything, she whispered, and for a moment something cold and calculating flickered in her eyes. Though perhaps I just imagined it. The kitchen light was dim, and I was too tired. The following days turned into a whirlwind of calls and paperwork. Verifications, confirmations, filling out forms. The bureaucratic machine worked slowly and with a grind. I noticed how quickly Ashley's initial enthusiasm faded. She no longer wanted to discuss plans for the future, brushed off my suggestions to pay off the mortgage or fix the leaking roof in the hunting cabin. We'll have time, she would say, not looking up from her phone. Let's not rush into decisions. At night, she would stay up late, and the bluish light of the screen would reflect in her eyes like a distant beacon. Sometimes I could hear her muffled laughter, and when I asked who she was texting, the answer was always the same. Work stuff, honey. You know how tough the real estate market is right now. The GPS tracker turned out to be surprisingly small, about the size of a quarter. I turned it over in my hands, sitting in my Ford parked 2 blocks from home. Early morning wrapped Portland in its usual haze, turning passersby into blurred silhouettes. Ashley had left for a house showing 10 minutes ago, giving me enough time. I got out of the car, trying to move as casually as possible. Her brand new Lexus, a recent acquisition, supposedly necessary for working with premium clients, was parked in the neighboring driveway. Installing the tracker took less than a minute. Years of working with small electronics at construction sites hadn't gone to waste. Sorry, darling, I muttered, snapping the magnetic mount under the bumper. You left me no choice. Back home, I installed the tracking app and froze, watching the blinking dot on the screen. It moved through the city, but clearly not along the route that would make sense for a realtor. Instead of heading to the upscale neighborhoods where Ashley usually worked, the car was heading toward the industrial zone on the outskirts of town. The dot stopped near the Pine Grove Motel, a weathered 2-story building that I had once inspected and deemed barely fit for occupancy. My heart skipped a beat. What was my wife, obsessed with luxury and status, doing in such a place? The next step was a listening bug. I chose the most advanced model, compact, highly sensitive, with remote activation capability. I installed it under the kitchen island countertop, Ashley's favorite spot for phone conversations. The first few days of recordings yielded nothing unusual. Discussions of deals with clients, chatter with friends, grocery orders. But on the fourth day, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Chasen, honey. Ashley's voice was honey sweet, the way she hadn't spoken to me in ages. We just need to be patient a little longer. As soon as I get access to the money. A pause. Then irritably, I know. You think I enjoy living with this bore. But $680,000 doesn't just fall from the sky. Another pause. Her laugh. Cold alien. Of course, I've thought it all through. He's so proper, so predictable. Don't you see? It's actually amusing. He still believes I care about that dump in the mountains. Jason. The name hit me like a punch to the gut, triggering a sudden memory. A corporate party 6 months ago. A tall man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as an AT manager. The way he looked at Ashley, how she laughed at his jokes. I leaned back in my chair, feeling like a character in a cheap detective novel. But reality turned out worse than any fiction. Opening my laptop, I began systematizing the collected data. Dates, meeting locations, recorded conversations. Everything was forming a horrifying mosaic of betrayal. The map on my phone showed regular visits to the Pine Grove Motel, always on Tuesdays and Thursdays, always between 2 and 4 in the afternoon. Premium client showings. Yeah, right. Ashley didn't even try to be particularly careful, so confident was she in my naivety. One day I followed her, parked at a safe distance from the motel, watching her enter room 214. 15 minutes later, a black Audi pulled up and Jason stepped out. I took several clear photos through a telephoto lens. But the real blow came when I hacked her email. I'm not proud of it, but the skills I'd gained while working with digital security systems at construction sites served me well. What I discovered exceeded my worst fears. The correspondence with Jason revealed the plan in all its details. They were waiting for me to receive the winnings. Then, divorce, where I would, of course, look like a complete loser. Ashley planned to portray herself as a victim of emotional abuse. My quietness and introversion provided excellent grounds for that. And then, a quick departure abroad as soon as the money was in her account. Darling, she wrote to Jason, can you believe this idiot still thinks bureaucracy can drag on for months? He doesn't even suspect that I know about his secret account. But never mind, my lawyer is already preparing the documents. You should see how he worries about our marriage, tries to save it. It's laughable. I sat in the darkness of my home office, reading these lines over and over again. Outside, the rain was beating down, the eternal Portland rain, turning the world into a blurred watercolor. Upstairs, Ashley was getting ready for bed, humming some melody, such a domestic, such a familiar scene, and such a completely fake one. My phone vibrated. Another message from the tracker. Ashley was planning a meeting tomorrow, at the same motel, at the same time. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the photographs spread out on the desk. Smiling faces, intertwined fingers, secret meetings. Everything documented, everything recorded. And then I saw it, an accidentally opened tab in her browser. Search history. How to get access to husband's bank account. Divorce and property division. How to prove psychological abuse in marriage. And the most recent, statute of limitations on fraud. Something broke inside. 6 years of marriage turned to dust, collapsed like a house of cards. Every moment of happiness, every smile, every touch. Was it all a lie? Or did the truth die somewhere along the way, quietly suffocating under the weight of unfulfilled hopes and unspoken grievances? I pulled out a bottle of whiskey, old Jack Daniels, a gift from colleagues last Christmas. Poured 2 fingers worth but didn't drink. Just watched how the desk lamp's light played in the amber liquid. My thoughts flowed slowly, like thickened resin. The sound of an incoming message snapped me out of my stupor. Ashley's phone, forgotten in the kitchen. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself anymore. The screen lit up with a message from Jason. How much longer do we have to wait? If you don't get the money soon, I'm out. Time is money, baby. Something about this phrase made me alert. I opened the notes on my phone, reviewing the collected information. Jason Pierce, IT manager. Wait, a quick internet search, and there it was, a discrepancy in his story. The company where he supposedly worked had no such position in their staff list. Digging deeper, I discovered more inconsistencies. Jason Pierce had appeared in Portland just a year ago, and his past was suspiciously clean, as if someone had carefully swept away all traces. But fragments of information remained on the web, enough to understand. I was dealing not just with my wife's lover, but with a professional con man. Checking his social media brought the final piece of the puzzle, photos with different women, all following the same script. Romantic relationships, sudden wealth, disappearance. And everywhere he introduced himself under different names, different professions. I put down my phone and took my first sip of whiskey for the evening. Laughed bitterly. Ashley, my smart, calculating Ashley, had herself become a victim of a scammer. She was planning to use me, not suspecting that she was being used too. Morning found me at my desk, surrounded by printouts, photographs, and notes. A plan began forming on its own, precise, cold, calculated, like a structural engineering blueprint. I knew what to do next, knew how to teach them both a lesson. Going upstairs, I walked into the bedroom. Ashley was sleeping, curled up on her side of the bed. In the morning light, she looked so young, so defenseless. The same girl I fell in love with 6 years ago. I stood for a while, looking at her, then quietly closed the door. Going down to the kitchen, I started making breakfast, as I had done hundreds of times before. Coffee, toast, cheese omelet. Let everything look normal. Let her think her plan is working. And I I would teach her a lesson about what happens when you build your life on lies. It was time to start my own game. The plan came to me suddenly while watching an old detective series. Sometimes the simplest solutions prove the most effective, especially when your opponent is blinded by greed. I spent a week preparing. Two black briefcases, the kind used for transporting cash. Convincing stacks of counterfeit bills, good enough to fool at a quick glance, but not so good as to fall under counterfeiting laws. A bank safety deposit box at the U.S. Bank branch on Pine Street. In the evening, coming home, I found Ashley at her usual occupation, sitting in the living room, glued to her phone. I deliberately slammed the front door loudly, giving her time to hide her correspondence with her lover. Honey, I've got great news. I tried to make my voice sound excited and happy. Remember I told you about the problems with the payout? She looked up, poorly concealed interest flashing in her eyes. Of course, dear. Did something work out? I went to the lottery's main office. To be honest, I lied to them, said we had huge debts, that the bank was threatening to take our house. I paused, watching her reaction. Well, I convinced them to give out the winnings in cash, though I had to agree to a smaller amount, 520,000 instead of 680. What? She jumped up from the couch, dropping her phone. Are you serious? In actual cash. Yes, two briefcases full of money. I took them straight to the bank, put them in a safety deposit box. It's too dangerous to keep that kind of sum at home. Her eyes were feverishly bright, but she tried to maintain composure. Of course, you're right. This is wonderful news. At that moment, my phone rang. I had specifically set a special ringtone for this call from Dad. Dad? What's wrong? I feigned growing concern on my face. What do you mean bad? God. Yes, yes, of course. I'll take the first flight out. Ending the call, I sank into an armchair in pretend despair. Dad's really sick. Doctors say it's a matter of days. I need to fly to Phoenix right away. Right now. Her voice mixed surprise with poorly concealed elation. Yes, the next flight is in 3 hours. I pulled the safety deposit box key and an envelope from my pocket. Listen, I don't know how long I'll have to stay there. Take these. Here's the key and access code to the box. If you need money, it's all yours. She took the key and envelope with trembling hands. Of course, honey. Don't worry, I'll take care of everything here. Within an hour, I was in a taxi, supposedly heading to the airport. In reality, I asked to be dropped off a couple of blocks from home, where I had parked a pre-rented car. The GPS tracker on Ashley's Lexus was working perfectly. She didn't make me wait long. Just 2 hours after my departure, the dot on my phone screen started moving. First, to the bank. Stayed there for 20 minutes. Then, onto the highway, away from the city, toward our old hunting cabin. I followed at a safe distance. The rain had intensified, turning the road into a dangerous strip of refracted light. Her Lexus turned onto the narrow mountain road leading to the cabin. A black Audi. Jason's car was already parked there. Parking half a mile from the cabin, I took out my binoculars. Through the windows, I could see Ashley ceremoniously placing the briefcases on the table. How she and Jason were opening them, rifling through the stacks of bills. Even through the rain, I could imagine their joyful exclamations. About an hour passed. I watched them carrying things to Jason's car, saw him bring them something to drink. And then something happened that I hadn't expected. Ashley suddenly staggered, grabbed her head. Jason supported her, helped her into her Lexus. He then got into his Audi. The cars started off in different directions. The Audi, toward the main highway. The Lexus was moving strangely, weaving more and more on the road. Something was wrong. And then I understood Jason hadn't just abandoned Ashley. He had slipped something into her drink. And now her car was heading toward the most dangerous section of the mountain road, where a sharp turn dropped off into a deep ravine. I floored the gas pedal. Rain lashed against the windshield, the wipers barely keeping up. Ahead, the Lexus was weaving more and more. Ashley was clearly losing consciousness. The turn was getting close. Too close. I watched as Ashley's car began drifting toward the shoulder. One more second, and it would break through the flimsy guardrail, plunge into the ravine, down where she might not be found for weeks. Screech of brakes, crunch of breaking guardrail, and silence torn by the screech of metal against rocks. I stopped my car at the edge of the cliff, turning on the hazard lights. In their flashing light, I could see how the Lexus had rolled several times before coming to rest on the rocky slope of the ravine about 100 feet down. By some miracle, not falling to the very bottom of the gorge, the car was stuck between huge boulders, transformed into a mangled heap of metal. I started climbing down the steep slope, slipping on wet rocks. Rain whipped across my face. Lightning illuminated the sinister scene in brief flashes. When I reached the wrecked car, I heard a weak moan from inside. Ashley was pinned between the crushed steering wheel and the seat. Her once perfect face was covered in blood from a gashed forehead. Her white blouse had turned to crimson rags. She was barely breathing, each breath coming with an agonizing wheeze. Nathan. Her voice was barely audible through the rain. Help. I stood in the pouring rain, looking at the woman who had betrayed me, who had planned to steal my money, who had lied to me every day. A woman whose life was now in my hands. My phone was in my pocket. One call to emergency services would be enough. Or I could just stand there, watching life slowly drain from the one who would destroy our marriage with her lies and infidelity. Ashley moaned again, her fingers weakly twitching as if trying to reach for me. And I stood there, feeling the rainwater running down my collar, deciding, did I have the right to become judge and executioner for the woman I had once loved more than life itself? The rain drowned out her words, but I heard every one of them anyway, as if they were being burned into my memory with a hot iron. Standing by the mangled car, I looked at the woman who had been the center of my life for the past 6 years. Now she was just a broken doll, trapped in an iron prison. Nathan, please. Her voice broke with pain and fear. I know I'm guilty. Forgive me. God, it hurts so much. Help me, I'm begging you. Lightning illuminated her face, pale, covered in blood from the gashed forehead. A trickle of blood slowly ran down her cheek, mixing with rain and tears. Her once perfect blonde hair had turned into a tangled mass, soaked with blood and dirt. I was such a fool, so greedy. Don't leave me here. She tried to move and cried out in pain. I'll do anything you say, just don't go. Nathan, I don't want to die. Her fingers weakly scratched at the wet metal, trying to reach for me. In her eyes was frozen animal terror, that same primal fear of death that turns the proudest people into those begging for mercy. It hurts. It hurts so much, she coughed, and I saw blood on her lips. Forgive me, darling. I really did love you, I swear. It was all the money. It poisoned me. Nathan, please say something. Just one word. I remained silent. Silent when she started sobbing. Silent when her pleas turned to hysteria. Silent, watching her bloody fingers tremble. I'll make everything right. I swear to God, everything will be different. Just help. Nathan, I can't feel my legs. I'm scared, so scared. Turning around, I started climbing up the slope. Behind me, her whisper turned into a scream. Desperate, piercing, filled with such terror that it probably could be heard even through the thunder. No, don't leave me. Nathan, I'll die here. Please. Reaching my car, I pulled out my phone. Dialed 911, feeling my fingers trembling, not from the cold or rain, from the decision I had just made. 911, what's your emergency? Car accident on the mountain road, 6 miles north of the Ravenwood Junction. Car in a ravine, urgent help needed. Woman, 34 years old, serious injuries. The rescue operation lasted almost 4 hours. I watched as firefighters cut through the metal, as paramedics carefully extracted her broken body, as the medical helicopter rose into the stormy sky. All this time, I didn't say a word. The diagnosis was like a sentence. Spinal fracture, multiple internal injuries, spinal cord trauma. She'll never walk again, the neurosurgeon said after 12 hours of surgery. But she'll live. You called for help just in time. They caught Jason a week later at Denver Airport. They found fake documents on him and a ticket to Mexico. He started giving testimony right away, hoping for a plea deal. Told everything about the money scheme, the planned murder, about his other victims. 10 years in prison, not much for a man who cold-heartedly planned to murder his lover for money. I filed for divorce while Ashley was still in intensive care. She signed the papers with a trembling hand, not looking me in the eye. I paid all the medical bills, $230,000 above insurance, another $50,000 a year for care in a private nursing home for the disabled, the best in the state. The last time I saw her was a year after the accident. I stopped by the nursing home to sort out payment issues. She sat in a wheelchair by the window, looking out at the garden, emaciated, aged 10 years, a gray streak in her once perfect hair. "Why?" she asked, not turning around. "Why did you save me? It would have been easier to let me die." "Because I didn't want to become like you." Those were the only words I'd said to her since the accident. The nurses said she wakes up from nightmares every night, screams, begs for help. Every movement causes pain. Every day reminds her of what she's lost. Her personal hell stretched out over years. And me? I moved to Colorado, to a small town called Silverton. Bought a house on the outskirts. Nothing special, but with a stunning view of the mountains. Started a small construction consulting firm. The locals quickly appreciated my professionalism. There was plenty of work. I met Sarah at the bakery on Main Street. She spilled coffee on me, apologized so adorably, blushing and stammering. There wasn't a trace of deception in her brown eyes, only sincerity and a kind of childlike spontaneity. She baked the best blueberry muffins in the county and blushed every time I complimented her. Our first kiss happened during the summer festival. The air smelled of jasmine and fresh pastries, music was playing, and fireworks were blooming in the sky. She stood on her tiptoes, wrapped her arms around my neck. And at that moment, I realized I was finally free from the past, from the pain, from the betrayal. Sarah moved in with me 6 months later. Brought her cookbooks, her old cat, and her habit of singing in the mornings. We furnished the house together. She insisted on a large kitchen. I built a porch with a mountain view. On weekends, her parents would visit, simple, kind people who accepted me as their own. Now, sitting on the porch and watching her tend to the garden, I think about the twists of fate, about how the hunger for money destroys souls, about how true happiness often hides in simple things: a cup of morning coffee, a warm smile, an honest look. Ashley taught me not to believe beautiful lies. Sarah taught me to believe in real love again. Every day she proves that sincerity and loyalty aren't empty words. Her love heals, asking nothing in return. Envelopes from the lawyer come once a month. I still pay for Ashley's care in the nursing home. It's not forgiveness or atonement, just a reminder to myself of the price one can pay for greed and betrayal. And the mountains? The mountains stand eternal, indifferent to our passions and suffering. They silently observe as some stories end and others begin. And in their majestic serenity, there's something comforting, as if a hint that all our dramas, in the scale of eternity, are nothing more than fleeting episodes. Honey, breakfast. Sarah's voice pulls me from my thoughts. The kitchen smells of fresh baking and coffee. A new day begins, and it carries only joy, without the shadow of past sorrows. I rise from my chair, taking one last look at the mountains. The morning sun paints their peaks pink, promising a clear day. Time to move on. Let the past remain in the past, in a folder of documents, in bank account numbers, in the nightmares of a woman who once decided that money was more important than love and loyalty. And here, in the present, a new life awaits me. Real, honest, happy.